Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I move to my contribution on the motion, I want to join the rest of our colleagues in welcoming our former comrade, Timothy Mangal. He interprets that well, and I don't get involved in that. And I know him, and when you say the word comrade, it's synonymous with a certain group, so he understands that. I apologize if the rest of us don't, but he does. And I also want to welcome him, not only as a colleague in this honorable house, but as a former schoolmate, attended the same secondary school. And we've socialized and interacted in other spheres. As I told him earlier, in this environment, it's not like the sports program where he's my guest, and I can only talk to him on certain levels. I want to congratulate him, and I just hope that his addition to this honorable house will add value to the contributions that are made. So we look forward to that, and of course we will sometimes disagree, but we always try to maintain mutual respect for each other. I also want to join the colleagues in expressing our sympathies and empathy for the other countries north of ours, as most of us may have relatives, friends, and some other connection to the Northern Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, US Virgin Islands. And I know there are several efforts locally to assist, so I hope that St. Lucia will find the appropriate means and ways to assist. My colleagues spoke about two colleagues spoke about the prisoner's story. I will leave that for another discussion, but I'm hoping that we'll find as a country and as a people appropriate ways to reach out to our brothers and sisters up north. To the substantive motion, I rise in support of the motion. It would really not make much sense if I would say that I don't. I mean, any initiative, any motion, any activity on the part of any government towards youth empowerment is something that I think all of us should support. And in support of the motion, we must not lose sight of certain very important dimensions. While it is a motion that, when you read it and you look at the wording, is very fancy, very nice, we must keep in mind that if we are going to raise or borrow in excess of 2.8 million US dollars and invest almost 9 million EC dollars in an initiative, it has to have some impact. It has to bring about some, you can say measurable or some significant change. I know it's a project, a pilot project, but even in that, it has to have some relevance and some meaning. And it was not strange that the independent Senator Oje, when he made his short presentation, used or mentioned the issue of he actually used a term that I think is pretty much similar to one that I had intended to mention. He's talking about empowerment, and he referred to education. I mean, which better way do we have to empower young people than to educate them? And we must never think that education is within four walls of any one building or exists in a vacuum. Education is all-encompassing. It begins even before birth, and it continues right through, in the family, in the church, in schools, in the parliament, on the streets. Education evolves and it continues its path everywhere we are. So we must be mindful that we don't limit our efforts to specific institutions when we speak of education. And I think the approach that is being referred to in this motion seems to be more of a corrective intervention than a preventative measure. Now, while we cannot prevent everything, but I think it is important as a country that we focus on nipping things in the bud and doing what we have to do to prevent the problems that we encounter. Because once you have the problem, you have to do a lot more to alleviate it than if you could have done something to prevent it in the first place. We spoke about school suspensions. As a former principal, I clearly understand the pain that you have to go through sometimes to tell a child that he or she must remain home for whatever period of time. And in some cases, we very well know that the suspensions could not even be out of school. I remember doing what I considered in-school suspension as a principal, where the child was suspended but was given permission to return to the building because that is the safest place for that individual. Putting that child, sending that child home, there was almost no home. And the school was the only safe haven for the child. So the child was allowed to be in the school, receiving counseling, receiving supportive care for the time. But just so that you demonstrate to the students that the behavior was not acceptable, you make some adjustments to the child's routine for the day. And this is how serious it becomes. So when we speak of these interventions, and I heard the minister in the Prime Minister's Office for Foreign Affairs make a very important statement that I have made in this honorable house, that the best investment we can make in this country is in our human resource. It's a statement that I have uttered several times. Our human resource is all we have. We have no oil. We have no bauxite. Right? There are certain resources that we wish we had, but we don't have them. What we have is our people. And how we treat them and how we take care of them will make the difference between a successful society or a society plagued with crime and deviance. And so, if we are serious about youth empowerment, we have to consider dealing with these issues early as we can, and in several different spheres, not only within isolated institutions. It is important that we know when these interventions are necessary. It is important that we know for whom, because we might very well be trying to help people who don't need the help and ignoring those who need the help, based on the way we diagnose them. So we have to be very careful with these interventions as to whom. There needs to be some measure of coherence. This center that we spoke about, that was used for the students who would be out of school, Mr. President, this is a very familiar concept to me, because in a previous life, I remembered having several discussions at the NPA level where there was actually a group of us commissioned, I didn't go, but a few other principals, visited a center with that model in Barbados, known as the Edna Nichols Center. And what was done there is very much what I am hearing that this center is supposed to provide. It basically gives a child who has gotten into trouble at school an opportunity to, instead of being home, go to a place during the suspension period to receive certain interventions depending on the child's issues. But I want to issue a word of caution in the implementation of that initiative and say or ask the question to our Ministry of Education specifically, and perhaps to a lesser extent, Ministry of Health and Ministry of Internal Security. We must take a look at the difficulties, the implications, and the challenges that are faced by these centers that have already experimented with this practice. So I don't know if there was a commission group that went over to Barbados. Yeah, right next to us, Barbados is a pretty good model for education. Visited the center, take a look at what's going on there, listen to the challenges that they are facing, because there are challenges. You cannot send every child there all the time. There are resources, and make sure that we do not repeat those mistakes that they're going to make. We must be prepared to invest the relevant resources. We have a budget of 2.86 million, to be borrowed, and I think 9 million EC. We have to project and see for the period of the intervention, is that going to support the activity? The last thing you want is to make a decision to invest in an initiative, not having assessed the implications of the action, and halfway through, you find that your resources are not adequate, or your practices need to be changed. So I just ask that before we actually go into this initiative, which I have no problems with, we must make sure that we look at the difficulties and the implications. I also note that while we speak of the youth empowerment issue, it sounds as if it's something that we are not consistent with regarding the actions of the government generally. I have said it before that anytime there is an initiative presented by a government, it does not reside in the initiative alone to show what the government is about. The government's actions have to be in support of the laws, initiatives, policies that they intend to implement. And how are we offering hope to our students? Our colleague who spoke earlier did mention the issue of relevance of the education system. He mentioned having to make changes. I just want to use that as for want of a better word. To look at whether the education system that we have really takes care of the needs of the country and really takes care of the realities that we face. Does it provide for a global citizen? Does it provide for what I remember the Prime Minister of Jamaica, he was then the Minister of Education a few years ago when we visited Jamaica on an education trip, made reference to seamless education and creating the ideal Caribbean child. What are the characteristics of that individual? And I want to agree that to some extent, we need to pay attention to that when we take any initiative on behalf of young people. Are we making sure that these initiatives embrace other entities and they are not in isolation? So when a government takes or presents a bill like this in the House, and I stand in support of it, I expect to see that there is some effort made towards ensuring that, to use the words of the Minister of Education in the lower house, no child is left out. No individual is left out. But I have to say, sadly, that some of the actions do not suggest that this is the case. Second chances will always be necessary. We want to avoid them, but they will be necessary. And I want to use an example of an existing institution that seems to be reaching its the end of its tenure, or it's going to be ended, that offered second chances to students. I heard mention of CARE, and that is good, but I realized that NSDC, which several of the students described by Senator Oji earlier, who are don't even care to go get their CXC results because they don't think it has much use to them. They look to engage in some form of apprenticeship, and NSDC provided just that in several areas, particularly in the technical areas. And what are we doing? While we come here to forward this bill and to present all these lovely ideas, we are shutting this down, or we are looking away from this in favor of private funded institutions that most of these young people do not have the ability to access. They have to pay thousands of dollars to enroll, and they cannot afford it. And I'm speaking of some of these private entities like CHTTI. Although the government is investing its resources in it, the young people who are not able to access their tertiary education, who have difficulties because their parents cannot get fancy mortgages to send them to university, that is where they get a second chance. A couple of $100 and they can access a course in small engines repair, in electricals, in plumbing, and even in basic good manners, etiquette, table manners. These are all things that are taught to these people. Can they access this? Are we giving them a realistic chance to empower them? So we must be consistent. I support this. I think it is a good initiative. But our actions must always reflect in our practices as a government, generally. I saw the level of excitement in the lower house when the debate started on this motion. It seemed very pensive and low-key until the member for Beaufort North at the time made the observation, and then I saw it picking up. And I was very concerned up to that point, because I thought that that a motion like this one would have excited even the presenter of the motion, and everybody else would have had something to add and something to show the young people that if we are going to come to Parliament to make decisions like that on their behalf, that we are excited about it, that we really want to see it happen, whether it's the opposition, the government. Every single member of the House needed to show a level of enthusiasm and interest. But it was, it was looking really low-key until it was brought up, and then the debate really picked up on that. And I think these are the actions that the young people are looking at. They always tell you it's not about what you say, but what you do. We have to at least look like we are serious about this. We have to be convincing. We have to show the young people that we, who are the leaders put in this honorable house to represent their interests, are excited about the things that we bring into them. And I was wondering if that member had not raised the issue, how many persons would have spoken on that bill? Whereas other bills that do not have anything to do with these young people, hours and hours are spent on it. All kinds of things go on. But when it relates to their business, and they say to you, a lot of young people do not follow Parliament. They don't sit at home and watch. They're not interested. Right? They think it's not their business because nothing that relates to them is being taken seriously at that level. So we must communicate the right messages to our young people. And I think that the issue of and I want to use an example too. I have to refer to the leader of government business when he was presenting the motion, and he admitted that he was having difficulty pronouncing recidivism. And I asked myself, I know he was a bit jovial about it, but even that could be interpreted as, you don't even know the word, We have to be very serious about this. Young people get those unintended messages. And I hope they didn't get that message from you, honorable member. I hope not. They have to, and really recidivism is really the tendency for one to return to a behavior that they previously, and we must let them know that we're concerned about it. We do not want them to relapse, because that is one of the reasons in schools that principals and teachers have to revert to punitive measures rather than non-punitive, because you know the efforts that you've made with parents, with the private citizens, and the students seem to revert to the same behavior, the undesirable behavior. We must ask ourselves why these things happen. And so I speak on this to suggest that we need to think about prevention rather than interventions or correction. Whatever interventions we have, they need to be focused on prevention, so that we do not have to invest all that money only to find out after the pilot project has been completed that the same behaviors, the same problems are reoccurring in the same communities where we had the initiative. That would sadden us very much. So, Mr. President, I want to continue to express my support for the bill, but I want to say that pilot programs alone will not do it for youth empowerment. And I'm not suggesting that I am against what is going on. I'm saying it's not enough. And since the government of the day has decided to make a move, I want to say that we have to do a lot more. It mustn't look like we're just trying a little something. It mustn't look like that at all. And so we must back it up. And there must be some sustainable, strategic motions or moves following this initiative. So I look forward to hearing some of these when we return to this house. Now, we talk about empowering people, but to empower anyone, apart from providing them with good education, is to provide them with opportunity. And opportunities are provided for tertiary level education, for employment, and for any opportunity for people to grow. You must let them feel a sense of inclusion, that they are not isolated from what is going on. Now, the people who are responsible for the minds or for shaping the minds of our young people, the custodians of education, are teachers. And while we talk about empowering young people, we have to also empower the people who are responsible for taking care of them. Teachers, for sure, especially teachers in the lower brackets of the school system. Preschool, infant school teachers, primary school teachers. We have to make sure that these people are placed and are properly catered for, have incentives for them to do a fine job at that level. Of course, the church and the family has its part to do. But within the school system, if the children have a good foundation, it is less likely that they will be deviant later on. But what are we doing as a government? We are bringing a policy on youth empowerment to Parliament, but the institution that is supposed to provide training for these teachers, for these people who are custodians of the children, we are stopping the programs there. So after Lois Community College, Division of Teacher Education, what is happening there in 2017 in September? No training offered for primary school teachers. And we know that there are over 25% of our teachers in the schools who are still untrained, who don't have the pedagogical knowledge to impart the knowledge to the children. We have to make that a priority so that the young people know that the people, and the parents also, that the people that they are going to, the people who are going to be their custodians, who are going to give them the love that we spoke about and the attention, are themselves provided with incentives. Too many of our young, ambitious teachers are leaving the system, especially the males. If you look at the primary schools, you can hardly find a male teacher there. Why are the young men leaving the service? You know why? Men have to provide for their families too, Mr. President. They are leaving the service because there are no incentives for them to remain there. And not only about their pay, but about opportunities for upward mobility. When young men who want to do well and who love to teach and want to give their best to the education system look and see that there is no mobility for them, there is nowhere to go because they can't get trained, they can't get to be permanent. The Bachelor of Education program that was offered at Arthur Lewis full-time in 2 years in St. Lucia, where a young man could have obtained a degree in education to improve himself, is now offered part-time with no bursaries and no support. And whoever wants to pursue that has to negotiate with his principal to get time off on an afternoon. Some of them are having difficulties doing that, depending on who the principal is and where they live, to be able to access this thing so that they can improve themselves. And there is no incentive. They have to fund it all on their own. So if we're serious about youth empowerment, we must also be serious about ensuring that the people who are taking care of these young people are also empowered and they remain there to help us do the job. So the better you do within the school system is the less my dear Minister of Internal Security, my dear Minister of Health, and my Minister of Social Transformation and so on will have to do. They will be able to focus on the hospitals and better policing and so on, rather than having to get involved in dealing with children being suspended from school. So we need to make the teachers happy so that they can make the children happy. Now I don't want to spend much time on the other issue because it has been probably exhausted by now. But the school that I was principal of, Mr. President, is a typical example. As we speak today in the House, the children who go to that school are at home. They are not at school. And you see where the deviance, begins or it continues. They have been on 8 weeks vacation. They are looking forward to entering school and going back. And when they get to school on the first day, the children don't know about our problems. That's not their issue. They have their books, their brand new uniforms. They have succeeded the common entrance. They're looking forward to their new school. They report to school, all excited, only to find the minister and the teachers and the parents in some kind of conflict, and they have to be sent back home. The parents have made the arrangements. Some of them have nowhere to put these children. They have to go to work. It's not like you have a daycare you can put little babies. You have adolescents on your hands. Some of the parents work outside of the communities where they live. Where are these children now? I can tell you the population of Migu Secondary is over 700, almost 800 children. So you have 800 young people somewhere doing what? And when they return to school to begin the academic year, they have lost 2.5 weeks or so. They are not settled. It takes another 2 or 3 weeks just to settle them. So you are losing on important instructional time. You are losing out on time that the government has to pay the teachers for, because the teachers still have to be paid. So the resources that we are investing are being wasted. Only if someone saw it fit to pay attention to the repairs that had to be done this week and last week should have been done in July, August. And I am not going to argue the issue about the, or to support the issue about the allocation was not made. What is our priority? I have asked that question before in this country. If we believe in youth empowerment, we believe in mobility and education, what is our priority in terms of who we pay attention to? If it was $1 million that was allocated to school repairs, and the minister can justify that, fine. Because the previous government, and I always say that no government has given enough money to education. So if the 1 million was not enough in any government, if it is 100,000 you have to spend to make a school ready for September, spend it, but spend it in July and August. Do what you have to do before the children have to come to the school and return home, and the media and everybody is all over the place. That is not as important as the children's education. So I think that there are certain protocols that are in place by the Ministry of Education. I'm very familiar with them. Principals submit their priority areas way before July. As soon as you finish staffing and appraisals, that goes in. These should have been taken, and that issue we're dealing with should have been addressed long before September 4th. So I think there needs to be deliberate planning and organization within the departments that are responsible for ensuring that children are placed in a proper environment for learning, and not let the chaos begin and then have to go and fix it. I hope that this bill is not a repetition of this. I use that analogy because it really makes sense to prevent the problem than to have to go and deal with it afterwards. Because even if now Miku Secondary gets a nice Form 3 block, that would be great, but the damage has been done. The damage has been done. So we have to prevent that. Mr. President, I just want to move quickly because I didn't intend to say, I just had to make 2 or 3 points on that. And let me make the next point. I think that when we tell young people that we want to empower them, we must show them that we trust their ability and there is equity in the distribution of our resources as far as they are concerned. We must give them hope that those we teach to be honest, to obey the law, to be truthful, to love each other, all the ideas we teach them at home and in church and in school, when they look around us, or around them, they are supposed to see that being reflected among us, the leaders. So what do you say to a young man or a young lady, say between the age of 14 and 30 or 14 and 25, who has done all the right things, obeyed his parents, because we like to focus on the negatives. Let's focus on a few positive things that children actually do. You obey your parents, you never got into trouble, you never got suspended, you went to school, primary, secondary, you did your A-levels or your technical, you got all your subjects, you went to university, your parents had to mortgage their home to spend thousands of dollars to put you through university, Mr. President. You are successful, you graduate with first-class honors. You are the top of your class. You return to your country, and you're struggling to get somewhere, a little squeeze in the system at grade 10 or 12. After about 10 or 12 years, or 15 years sometimes, or even 20, depending on those who have to do it part-time. You may spend 20 years to get to that point. And as a young man, as a young woman, you did everything right. You didn't deviate. You did all the things that you were told. Only to find out that after all those years, you look across the road and you see a political operative, or you want to call them surrogates, whoever you call them, spends 2 weeks doing a certain course and can take up a job that is about 10 grades higher than yours. Put yourself in the place of a young man or woman who has done all those things. Even their parents mortgaged their house, invested thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, just to make sure that their children do the right thing that we want them to do, to get to where they want to. And what is the reward? They look around them and they see, well, somebody could just do that in 2 weeks with state funds and get to grade 20 or so. You know what that causes? Anger, frustration. It's not fair. And the young people see those things, They see that. We teach them that you must earn the right to be who you are. You must earn your stripes. You don't do shortcuts to get to the top. But we are taking the shortcuts ourselves. And so when the young man, I'm not suggesting that anybody's deviance is appropriate. But when young people realize that taking the winding routes, the appropriate measures are not rewarded, then they figure, boy, I better take a shortcut. Because the shortcuts these big boys are taking. So we must walk the walk, Mr. President. We are teaching our children by our behavior the very things that we do not want them to do. And the example I just used was very deliberate because it's current and it's relevant. And we cannot hide that from the young people. No matter how many bills we pass in Parliament, no matter how many nice programs we put in place, children, young people especially, they watch what you do. They watch what you do. I remember telling children, no skinny pants. You know, I was a very firm principle, no skinny pants. One day I came from a funeral, and I stopped at the school, and the pair of trousers I was wearing, for some reason, it didn't have, you know, the bottom part was not the usual. And you know, some of the boys came back and said, so you have skinny today? You know? I did, for the first time I realized that the width of the trousers was a little, the boys were on my case. Well, I had to put that pair of trousers away. They are watching us, Madam, Mr. President, they are. So we must not speak out of one corner of our mouth with our policies and our fancy language and so on. And then the children look and they see the very things that we are telling them we shouldn't do is exactly what the system is doing. Finally, Mr. President, I want to turn to a couple of examples used by the Minister for Social Transformation, Equity, in the sitting of the lower house. And he referred to the two centers of excellence. He referred to the Center of Excellence for Art and the Center of Excellence for Sports. Now, hear me very well, Mr. President. As an educator, I have absolutely no problem with any Center of Excellence. As a matter of fact, I think we should strive to make every single school a Center of Excellence for whatever, whether it's for information technology, whether it's for arts, whether it's for music, whatever it is. Whatever we decide that is important for the development of our country, we can strive to make every single school or institution a center of excellence. That will get my support anytime. The only issue I have is that you have chosen two schools, Angers Secondary and Grosley Secondary. But I can't say much about Grosley Secondary because I don't live in that area, but I do live very close to Angers. And based on my background checks and my investigations, I want to ask, how much do the teachers and the people of that community know about that initiative? Have they bought into it? Do they think that it's important to them? Do they see a stake for them in it? Are they going to support the initiative? And when the whole implementation begins, that they will be anxious and eager to allow their children to participate? Mr. President, we must watch those initiatives. There is need for us to collaborate, communicate, mobilize, educate, right? And let people become part of the decision. Consultation. What level of consultation has been done? Now, I don't want to be too presumptuous and say that it is going to be implemented as of tomorrow, but I am just on a side of caution. We need to ensure that the concept is understood by the people who are going to be responsible for implementing it and the people for whom it is going to be done. Because if we don't do that, Mr. President, there's going to be resistance because it's a change and people are generally resistant to change. And I hope the same will happen in Grosley. Because when I think of the Elite Athlete Development Program, I can see how that would have worked well with an initiative like that. But I don't know if those who are going to implement it have taken that into consideration. So that is a key factor that I think we need to consider. Now, to wrap up, I love the idea of the initiative. I love the idea of change. But I also want to say that any change you're going to make, especially at that level, in government, it has to inspire people, it has to excite people. I don't know how excited young people are about some of the things that we talk about, especially if they themselves are not part of the discussion. So we have to provide opportunities for them to have their input. We have NYC, we have Youth and Sports Councils, we have football clubs, we have voluntary organizations, we have a whole lot of groups where youth congregate, where youth have structure, and they recognize. I would ask the question, to what extent are these organizations going to be part of the discussion in terms of implementation? And I see my colleague nodding. I imagine that she's in agreement and that they will see to it that this is done. Because as a young person who has committed my entire life to youth development, I would hate to see any initiative that the country is going to invest $9 million in for youth not bring about the desired results. And what you do is that you want to make sure that when you implement change, there is a change in behavior for those that you have made the change, or on behalf of those that you have made the change. So, Mr. President, how do we ensure that this becomes a success? We have no guarantees. But I think that we need to focus on leadership in the communities, volunteerism. There is too much focus on money and paying for things. I think that some of the structures that exist right now can work if we empower them by giving them responsibility and making them part of the program. So I expect to see volunteerism, the community spirit being brought in. National pride, I heard the minister who spoke before me mention the issue of not citizenship, but democratic education for democracy. National pride, this is critical. This is very critical. And how do you do that without a comprehensive program that involves schools and community? You have to, because that's the only way they can identify with it. It has to look like them. Even the people who are going to champion this thing have to look like them. So I expect that there will be youth. There will be lots of young people in the implementation of these programs. And these young people are not going to come there and see people calling them in to do certain things that don't look like them, that don't speak like them, that don't understand them, that don't relate to them. So I hope that it will create some youth employment opportunities, Mr. President, because we know the situation of employment now. So I call on the government, while I support this motion, to ensure that whatever is done with this initiative, that it results in the true empowerment, participation, and brings about the desired changes that we want in our young people. So having said that, Mr. President, I want to again reiterate that I support the motion, and I hope that the implementation is effective for the people, the young people of our country. Thank you, Mr. President.